I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. So, the topic of the day is stoned drivers are not as dangerous as drunk drivers. So, we'll see what you have to say about that.
Okay.
Starting out here, first question is: are there any stats for traffic accidents that were the result of THC impairment?
Well, I actually those stats would be hard to track. There has been a recent study done by the National Transportation Safety Board specific to this issue about the effects of marijuana and your ability to drive versus alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And there has
What's
been
the
a
bottom line on the study?
bottom line on the study is pot's better than alcohol. Bottom
Okay.
line.
Okay.
Now it might depend on how much pot and what kind it is. And out here in Colorado, I mean, this is a industry, so certain kinds are stronger than others. But all things being equal, according to the National Transportation Safety Board, marijuana is safer than alcohol to drive with.
And I think most people kind of know that, so which is good. It's good to hear you say that. So, how often is marijuana proven to be the cause of an accident, in your experience?
Well, okay. Now, this is a challenging question because whenever there's an accident, if there's any impairment of any driver, they immediately you're in some trouble because they're going to bring out the argument that, well, but for your impairment, you could have avoided the accident. So even if someone else is clearly at fault, you could still be looking at a charge. And if someone gets injured in that accident and you're intoxicated or impaired, the charges are going to be significant. It's going to be a big charge. If you're intoxicated either by alcohol or marijuana or any other kind of drug, and someone's injured in that accident, that's a felony assault. Vehicular assault is what that's called.
Wow.
Yeah, very serious, and it happens. Marijuana presents some specific challenges for police officers. They have DUIs with alcohol down to a science. They tried to just leap from one science of well, they call it a science for alcohol over to marijuana, and it didn't go so well. And I think we've run into a lot of headaches when they try and just take that step. Like, for example, the minimum level of THC in your blood, which they consider to be over that to be impaired.
Right.
Good example.
Got it. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, everyone should be aware of this. So, what should someone do if they're pulled over after smoking marijuana?
Well, okay, so there's a lot of factors. First of all, I'm hoping that you don't have the means of ingesting the marijuana right there in plain view, like a pipe or a vape pen sitting on your console. And I also hope that there's no smoke or the smell of marijuana emanating from the vehicle, because those are going to lead directly to probable cause to arrest. Taking those factors out, the officer is going to have to, and taking out the number one question, which they ask you is, have you had anything to smoke or drink? Assuming you don't confess, which I advise against. I don't advise lying to a police officer. That's against the law, but I don't advise confessing either. So I don't answer that question. But if you're pulled over and they start asking about marijuana, have you been smoking it? My advice is not to answer that question, to refer them to your lawyer, to say that I'm not going to answer questions like this because I'm on advice of my counsel. That'd be my advice, not to make a statement or not to answer that question. You can't lie to a peace officer, but you sure don't have to confess either. So that's my advice: is don't.
That's excellent advice, and I think something we were talking about yesterday might be worthwhile to repeat today, which is you kind of brought up the issue of transporting marijuana paraphernalia and possibly small amounts of marijuana, and you had said very definitively it should be in your trunk without any exception. So just in this conversation, that might be worth repeating.
Right. Well, this is similar to an open container law, which alcohol, which we're all familiar with.
Right.
But it's hard because alcohol container is different than a marijuana container.
Exactly.
When you buy it at these local dispensaries, they're gonna seal it in a canister. And my advice is going to be, don't put that in your main compartment. That's in your glove box, in a console, anywhere in the main compartment, because that is considered to be within your reach. And that's an open.
And keep it sealed, like as it was sold to you before. Is that right?
Yeah, depending on what you get. I mean, think about it. If you get, you have more than one usage. So I mean, it's very difficult to carry that around. You got to be careful. And vape pen's an easy one to mess this up with, because is that sealed or not? Is that there's a canister in there? It has oil, there's oil in there. If that's in your main compartment, arguably that's an open container.
Right.
When I say arguably, these are new laws. So we don't really know how they're going to come down. But I'm very uncomfortable with allowing a police officer, when you're on the side of the road, to be making that call.
Right.
And much better not to be in that situation.
And that's kind of leads into the next question, which is, should people carry marijuana in the car?
Well, I mean, you got to get home somehow, but I would suggest that you put it in your trunk. It's really the only safe place to do that. That's all I can say. And if you don't have a trunk, you have an SUV or something with one large compartment, well, that whole large compartment is considered open. So I would keep it sealed and then take it where you want it. And the legal advice anyway is not to have that. Once that container's opened, you can't have it inside your main compartment of your vehicle.
Right. And I mean, this is kind of a little bit off topic, but I just wanted to ask you this question. I have a briefcase. I don't usually carry a briefcase with me, but that has the number, a lock on it. Would it make sense just to get an old briefcase and throw it in your trunk and keep say if you have a hatchback or some kind of a vehicle that doesn't have a trunk, to get a briefcase and throw all your marijuana paraphernalia in there, keep it locked? Can the cop compel you to open it?
Well, that's a challenging question. If the officer arrests you, then he can search the whole inside of your vehicle, the whole, and so he's going to do that.
Sure.
Now, if you had a bag that was locked with the combination,
right?
I think technically they can open that as well.
Sure.
So, but if it's in your trunk, then you got an argument that perhaps it's a little more secure, possibly.
Right. So it might not be a bad idea. In other words, would that be fair to say?
Yes. I mean, this is a tricky situation. I mean,
sure.
Officers don't like are not comfortable. This is one of the signs of the apocalypse, that marijuana is illegal to some police officers. And
right.
You got to understand that they are challenged by this. So you don't want to be challenging a police officer.
Got it. Okay. And I know this is probably one of those complex questions as well. And it probably would be different for smoking versus consuming edible products. But how long after smoking should someone wait until they drive?
Well, okay, there are many variables.
Of course.
Some people have a higher tolerance.
Right.
Other people less so. Some marijuana is stronger. Some means of ingestion lasts longer. For example, an edible. Mm-hmm. I think you're going to be out for a long time with an edible.
Right.
Anyone who's tried that would probably back me up on that.
Right.
But if it's a traditional smoking of it, I mean, most people know that after several hours you're going to be okay. But I recently did a DUI where the person made an admission that they'd smoked 8 hours before, and the officer arrested him. He's charged with DUI right now. That case is pending.
Wow.
And they're not backing off. And the officer is testifying that she's an expert and that some drugs are so strong, some marijuana is so strong that it could still be affecting or impairing him. And I have a lot of good defenses, but that we're going to bring in that case. But you don't want to be in the position of sitting at my table with me making that defense if you can get out of it. And so I'd say the number one problem with these kinds of things is the admission.
Right.
That really gets you. Or the smoke in the car, or if he says he can smell it, and sometimes it's on your clothing or something too. You have to remember that too.
So just tell them, just call Dave, right? Call Saul.
Well, you're in a tough situation. I think anything you say is going to be used against you, and any marijuana admission,
right.
and this goes for alcohol too. I only had 2 beers, or I only had 1 joint. Well, I
Right.
smoked 8 hours ago. In the report, it'll just show up admits to smoking, and it'll show up just like that.
Black and white.
This last case, that's exactly how she wrote it down. And I cross-examined her, and she admitted, well, he admitted it 8 hours ago, but yeah, he admitted it, and it was, and that's
Bottom line. Yeah, that's a tough situation.
Yeah.
So how expensive is a ticket for driving under the influence of marijuana?
Okay. There are many costs. They're going to be, okay. So with this particular kind of citation, unlike alcohol, there's no limit over which they're going to revoke your license. So as long as you submit to the testing, that in of itself is not going to take your license, because but if you refuse, then they have the right to take your license. So there's a cost to get a license back. Even if you have a DUID, driving under the influence of drugs with marijuana, they'll still make you put an interlock device in your car to drive again, which tests for alcohol. As I said, this is new science applied to, or old science applied to new facts, and we're just adapting this. But
Right.
So that's expensive. But if you're convicted of DUID, for example, marijuana, the standard costs are if it's a first offense, your standard costs are going to be anywhere from $1,300 to $1,500. That's court costs alone. That's not including any fine. It's not including any alcohol or drug classes they're going to make you do. They're going to make you do at least, say, 24 hours of that at $30 a class. It's going to cost you $1,500, $1,800. Attorney's fees on top of that. If there's priors, you're going to get more fines. You're going to get a possible incarceration. You're also looking at monitoring of yourself while you're on probation. You have to pay to get tested while you're on probation to make sure you're not continuing to either drink or do drugs or smoke marijuana. Even if it's legal, you can't smoke it while you're on probation. That's a big one here.
Wow.
And then so you have to pay for that privilege. So it's gonna rack up. I mean, first time offense, it's gonna be pushing $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 in that range. Quite expensive.
So bottom line, get your taxi or Uber programmed into your phone, for when you have any question at all.
That's true. I mean, yeah.
And get your attorney's phone number as well, probably.
And this may be one example where marijuana is better than alcohol, because I just find, and this is just my experience with people who have been cited for this, is people go to a bar, they drink a lot, but they don't necessarily go to some certain place to smoke a lot, and then have to get home. So if you're at a friend's house and you're smoking a lot, I think maybe your judgment's a little better. People seem to
Sure.
I feel fine when they're really not fine with alcohol. With marijuana, they realize, I can't do this. I don't know why it is, but they just seem to have a little bit better judgment, and perhaps they're more willing to take a cab.
More high quality judgment, right?
Better.
Right. So, okay. So the next question is, I think I know the answer, but let me ask it. Should I get an attorney for my DUID case?
Yeah, well, asking a lawyer that question, the answer is certainly yeah. These are complicated cases. There's a lot of there's new law. I mean, the officers don't even understand it very well.
Right.
We're working it through with judges. So there's a lot of things. And of course, these cases are, depending on the facts, are triable. It's harder for law enforcement to police these types of crimes. So because of that, that's an avenue for a good lawyer to get you a better deal or get you out of it. And believe me, if you can get out of this, you want to.
Exactly.
And even not to minimize what's going to come down the pipe at you.
Let me ask you a question. What if you had an old friend, reveal, I'm sorry. What if you had an old friend reveal that they got a DUID and they're planning to represent themselves in court? What would you tell them?
Well, they're about to play a game they don't even know the rules about, I would say. And how well are you going to do at that? First of all, it's an old friend of mine. I get those calls all the time, and I'm unfortunately, that's my job to go out and do that. So they're going to be represented. But I think it's just it might work out for you. Some people I've seen can handle it, but I think that's more rare. I think that it's such a challenging part of the law and plus when you're talking to a prosecutor, they know you can't go to trial on this case. They know you can't push them, so that you're going to take whatever they offer. If that's okay with you, then maybe you could do it yourself. But I find that not to be usually the thing they offer is not the best thing, the best result you can have happen.
You're running a lot of risk with your freedom and your quality of life.
Was treated exactly as a DUI, no different. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So the last question of the day is, before we jump off, is how did Colorado decide to set the blood concentration levels at 5 nanograms per milliliter of blood?
Oh, that is a good question. Okay, well, that is an example of politics meets public desire meets police demands and prosecution demands. So we've always had marijuana. It's always been around. We always had smoking and driving. I don't see any increase in the cases since we legalized marijuana, but they've always been pushing for this before this, and actually it was rejected by the state legislatures twice when they said, the science that you're trying to use is bad. It's just not good science, and anyone can see that. And then when it came down to, we are going to fight you on legalizing marijuana if you don't give us this 5 nanogram limit, and everybody, and by this point it was the majority of people who wanted legalization of marijuana. They just said, okay, we're going to give you that if you'll leave us alone, law enforcement, and not fight us on getting this legalized. And so that was kind of a deal that was made, and the law was passed, and it's real now. It's not a scientifically valid one, but it's still there now in a good way. Unlike DUI, where being over 0.08 in Colorado takes your license, being over 5 nanograms of THC doesn't take your license. That is one good thing. These guys, they're not. I mean, they gave them something, but they didn't give everything they wanted, and so that's helpful. Now we all know that if someone who smokes regularly is going to have elevated THC all the time, whether they're impaired by it or not. If it's the next day, they're still going to have an elevated THC. They're going to be over 5 nanograms. And what I prefer people to do under that circumstance is go ahead and take that test anyway. Don't refuse just because you've heard that. Take the test, and then let's make that defense. Say, no, you complied, you agreed, and I'll bring a scientist in who's going to say, a forensic toxicologist who will say, well, if they smoke marijuana regularly, this result doesn't really prove anything. And that's where I prefer to be in court.
Fantastic. And any parting wisdom that you'd have to people for Colorado citizens that that enjoy consuming marijuana and are concerned about keeping their freedoms? Well,
I'd say number one, law enforcement for open use is through the roof. It's increased 100-fold in the state of Colorado since legalization. So, if you got it, you don't have to flaunt it. We work really hard to get here. I think everyone agrees it's a good thing, but law enforcement's still tricky. So it's kind of like, we want a tough argument, but you don't want to rub it in their face. Okay. So I'd say, first of all, open use isn't a good idea. Secondly, just like with alcohol, you got to use your head. I mean, if you're going to be impairing your judgment and your ability to drive, so under those circumstances, you should plan ahead before you start. You have to get home. So how's that going to happen? And think of that in advance. That's my advice.
Got it. Well, thank you very much for your time, David, and we'll be talking to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.